So now the estimation with a very elaborate sowing which started from the month of October, continued till the month of January. We had a huge plantation of Kabulis. But then weather played its tricks and there were severe cold weathers experienced in the Kabuli growing areas, because of which there seems to be some damage to the crop. In some areas it has been around 30-35%, some areas have been untouched with the damages. So taking a conservative or maybe a greater estimate of damage, we consider that the damage should have been somewhere around 20-25%. Earlier the estimations of the crop were somewhere around 600,000 metric tons. But now the estimations are reduced because of the damage, and people are estimating that crop would be anywhere above 425,000 tons. Because no one knows how much comes from the damaged plants. So the estimation is over and above 425,000 metric tons. 425,000 metric tons is the bare minimum which we are expecting to come in India. Looking at the climate again, the larger calibers would be reduced in the amounts, and we're expecting somewhere around 50% or 55% of recovery for the larger calibers, talking about the 11 mm and 12 mm. And that makes us with 200, 210, 215,000 of larger calibers to be exported. And as far as the domestic consumption is concerned, I believe most of the domestic market eats 9 mm and a little above size, and then there are the 8 mm, which are mostly consumed in India, because they are cheaper. And the 11 mm and 12 mm are mostly used for the export markets, because they fetch better price in the international markets. Apart from that, talking about the supply pipelines in India and across the world, I believe there was very little chickpeas left at the end of the December, because the complete Indian pipeline was empty, which is why the chickpeas that is coming into the market right now is getting consumed in the domestic market. Apart from that, the nearby destinations, talking about the UAE, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, they were all again empty. So the chickpeas that is coming into the market is selling right now as quickly as possible. But as I told you, that the sowing was done in an elaborate period. So we're not experiencing the greatest of the arrivals in the market at this point of time. The major portion of arrivals would start coming after 25th of the February and would continue till whole of the March and maybe go until April, because some of the seeding has already also been done in the month of January. So I believe that the markets should correct itself within the course of time, with the arrivals increasing after 25th of February.
Thank you, Rajat. Hugo, I'll ask you to quickly explain us a little bit what is happening in Argentina. We hear there is a sizable crop this year. So what is the size of the crop? Which all markets they are targeting, and what are the calibers available?
Last year, 2011, due the barrier that our government put on the export or on corn, wheat, and soya beans, they collect too much for the growers. So the growers was incentivized to substitute some of the areas to chickpeas. And we saw a big jump in the production, or at least the planting intention was very good. At the end, we have some losses, especially in Córdoba province. We mainly produce in two areas. One is north, Salta, and the other one is Córdoba, is center of Argentina. I can predict, we have not official numbers right now of the total production. And also we have considerable losses in Córdoba area. So I can estimate, if my Argentinian colleagues are not against, that we harvest for export around 90,000 metric tons. Considering the carryover of 2010, because Argentina harvest time is in November, we export last year about 50,000 metric tons, which crop 2011, we can consider 30,000 metric tons. So now Argentina is a big player into the chickpeas market, fighting with Canada, US in terms of volume. Now we can say that is more significant. We are mainly produce 7 mm in about 20% of the crop, 8 millimeters, 60% of the crop, and 9 millimeters, mainly 20% of the crop. So this is the picture of Argentina chickpeas last year. We have remaining stocks, mainly for 7 and 8 millimeters, because the vedette of the market was the 9 millimeters. Our main markets are Europe, with this size. Argentina entered at the right time in the market, with the empty market, no carryovers in Mexico. And the big challenge for us will be sell the 7 and 8 mm in these market conditions.
Thank you, Hugo. Murad, quickly tell us what is happening in Turkey. Is this production estimate for the current year is okay with your, in your opinion? And how much Turkey imported last year, and what is the projection for this year imports?
Thank you, Sudhakar. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Supply side, you mean, right? Supply side.
Just put, yeah.
Here, like this. It's okay?
Fantastic.
Okay, supply side. Turkey has main production area is central Turkey, but the production is everywhere in Turkey. The first crop comes out around early June. It's like 15,000, but the rest is coming out around end of July. The total crop size is like between 250,000 to 400,000, I can say. And around 15,000 of this is for export, and also 20,000 is export side for snacks, mainly to Middle East and Europe. And I can say that for big sizes, we have been importing from India and Mexico for the last 4 or 5 years. I can say that the figures are right about Turkey, 50,000, but 20,000 of this is going for import, and 30,000 is going for retrans business to Iraq. And this is what I can say.
Thank you, Murad. So now let's quickly move on to the price. Again, we'll follow the same pattern, but before we do that, to make it more interactive and interesting, what we'll do, we'll announce a prize. So we'll announce a prize of $5,000 for somebody who can predict the right range. The range shouldn't be more than $50. It could be 1,000 to 1,050. And this will be in the form of a credit note. Terms and conditions will be informed later, but this is the way we have to find a price range. It should be with the $50 band, and we will track the prices for March, April, May, for the good 3 months arrival. So give us your idea, because what we're seeing 130,000 tons production in Mexico, 400 to 450,000 tons production in India, 30,000 exportable surplus from Argentina, 90,000 tons of production, Turkey with 350,000 tons and with 50,000 tons of import. So this gives a sense as if there is super supply, but that supply is not translating into the prices mellowing down. While we are discussing about these big numbers, the prices are going up by $200 a day. So something is not really converging on the pricing front. So Give us a sense on the pricing, please.
Do you mean with Indian Kabuli chickpeas, correct?
Large size, Indian, Mexico.
Well, I think we have to make a difference. We cannot give only one price.
You can
So
give
you
your
want
opinion
us to
about
give
both.
a price of
both the-
Mexico and India, for
yeah,
example?
yeah, you can
Two
give
prices
about, that's right.
for March, April,
And May.
Wow, you require a lot of information, eh? Well, my numbers, I will give one number, because if we give a range, it will be very difficult. I dare to say, I start with Mexico. Okay. I would say, okay, 1,200 March, which is something which is demonstrable, because there are contracts. April, I would say 1,250, and May, 1,200 again. That's my estimation.
Right.
For India, I would say, I don't say anything for March, but I dare to say 1,100 April and 1,000 May.
We will, of course, we'll also come to audience. Rajat, give us your range.
Well, I don't have exact figures, but I can give that approximate range in terms of FOB USD. I believe currently the Indian chickpeas for March are trading at around 1,300 levels, 1,300, 1,350 FOB levels. But these, I believe, are superficial levels generated out of speculative buying, because there are probably no sellers for the March. Because due to the crisis that happened last year, people in India are afraid of short selling now. So there are superficial prices riding for the month of March right now. But I believe that over the period of time, if you talk about March, April, May, if the markets don't correct themselves for India in March, they might have to correct themselves for in the month of April, or maybe in the month of May. Because we cannot hold to such a long, such a huge crop with no export, because Mexico is allowing no room for us to export now. Last year, we had somewhere around 1,000 containers booked before the Mexico's news came that the Mexico is spoiled, and even more cargo was booked after that. But this year, I don't see a lot of future business happening this, because Indians are reluctant to sell and Mexico is selling cheaper. I believe the prices should range between 1,050 to somewhere around 1,250 USD FOB.
That's a very wide range, my friend.
Yeah, because that's a very wide range, I understand, because currently the prices are very high. Because currently they're selling at 1,350 FOB.
I think our friends are waiting from you a range of 50. Because 1,000 to 1,250 is 25% error of margin.
If I have to say plus minus $50, then I would suggest a range of 1125 FOB.
Thank you for being brave and putting a number to that. Hugo, what can we expect from Argentina in terms of pricing? Of course, they don't have 11 millimeter, but like 9.
But we cannot compare big calibers like Mexico with
Of course not. So that's
42, 44,
that's-
and India compete on the same caliber. It's difficult to predict, and all will depend what are the price for 7 and MMM into the Indian domestic market. I guess that if somebody can predict these numbers, or what is the downgrade in relation of the big calibers, we can say probably $100, $150 less. Okay. Today, you can find sellers for 8 millimeters at 940, 950 FOB. So for small calibers will be other market, not comparable with the 1,050, 1,100. Okay.
Thank you, Hugo. Murad, tell us what is the price which importers feel comfortable in importing in Turkey, at which you will see substantial business happening? Because unlike last year, this year, not much business happened because everybody was waiting for prices to drop. Exporter and importers both were in an impasse, and maybe they went to cover very quickly in the month of February. So that probably could possibly explain the price going up. But what is that level at which you'll see substantial business happening in Turkey?
Daily basis, I have been talking with my buyers. They assume that the price should be for Indian by 20th of March. It should be around 1150. for Mexican, it should be around 1200, 1250. Then for April, what I think Indian prices will increase a bit to 1250, and for Mexican, it should be around 1300. For May, the levels for Indian, it should be 1100, and for Mexican, 1200. This is what we think. My buyers think, actually.
Thank you, Baraz. So now we have a sense on the production, divergent views on production, especially in Mexico. We have a sense on the pricing. We know we couldn't get the range of $50 range, but at least we have a range of about $200 between the panelists. I will like now to audience, our friends, to comment or discuss with them what is the price they have in mind or the production. So please, if anybody has any questions, I invite you all to ask the panelists about their queries on the Kabuli chickpeas, please. Can we have the mic, please?
Being substituted in the area of other chickpeas. So I would like to know what is the factor behind it, what is driving farmers to switch over to that? That's what.
Hello. Madam, the prices of desi chickpeas range between 2800 to 3500 for the last year if we are looking at it. And last year the Kabuli chickpeas, which have almost the same yield with a little more care and a little more fertilizers and little more medicines to be put in the field, you can get a similar yield which sells at around 5,000 to 6,000 rupees a quintal. So you can see there is a price gap of around 1,500 to 2,000 rupees a quintal, which is why the farmers are more, farmers think that the Kabuli chickpeas is a lucrative crop to grow as compared to the desi chickpeas.
But that has always been the case, I suppose. Kabuli chickpeas prices are always higher than the other chickpeas.
Yeah, but there are certain areas where you cannot really grow Kabuli chickpeas. There's this certain Malwa region belt, around 150 kilometers of Indore district. That is a prominent region known for sowing the Kabuli chickpeas in India. Whereas people have tried growing the same Kabuli chickpeas in Maharashtra and Andhra, but they have not succeeded. So they are growing a different type of Kabuli chickpeas in Maharashtra and Andhra now.
Is there any reason behind it that like India permits export of Kabuli chana, whereas it does not allow export of the other thing? Is it driving that? That's what just one.
I believe that could be one of the factors, but I don't think even if we allow the export of desi chickpeas, Indian desi chickpeas, India itself is an importer of desi chickpeas from Australia, from Ethiopia, and from other destinations. So our crop is not just is not able to suffice the Indian consumption itself. We are importing desi chickpeas. So even if you open the export of desi chickpeas, I don't think it's going to fetch a better price for the farmers.
Do we have any other questions from the audience, from friends? Mr. Chandrasekhar, please.
Mic, please. So the mic's not on, sir.
I believe what is important for pulses in India is marketing support. And government's permission to open Kabuli chickpeas export is a very significant marketing support for the growers. For the marketability of Kabuli chickpeas is much higher than any other pulse. And therefore, there is a slow but steady and definite migration from chickpea growers to Kabuli chickpea cultivation. I think therefore, we need, farmers need to be supported with improved marketability, and export provides an avenue to support prices and improve the marketability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar, for that very valid observation and comment. If there are no other questions, I would like to wrap up this interactive session on the most global pulse, which is Kabuli chickpeas. It is produced, consumed all over the world from all destinations and all origin. So once again, I thank very distinguished By the way, that was on design to wake everybody up. Thank you very much for your deep thoughts. And thank you once again for coming and sharing your views with us. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. The final session of the Global Pulses Conclave. Just before we start, I think on behalf of a lot of the guests of this meeting, I think it's really in order for us to thank Mr. Praveen Dongra and the group here for organizing this fantastic event and networking event for everyone. So before we start, a round of applause for Praveen and his team. I think they really deserve it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Murad El-Khatib. I'm President and CEO of Alliance Grain Traders. We're head officed in Canada, and many of you in India will know us operating as Sascan Pulse, and so we're involved in the pulses sector. I have with me a panelist group which is very experienced and very representative of our industry. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of panelists who have been unable to join us, one flight that was canceled and one panelist who wasn't able to join us. So we'll do our best to address the issue of lentils, red and green. And I think just as a starting point, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to look at supply position within the various jurisdictions. So we're going to count on Jeff and Will and myself to give you a perspective of Canada, USA, Australia, and of course the three of us as processors, exporters, and traders will do our best because we're all involved really in more than one origin of production. So we're going to break down the regional focus and make this more of a global lentil focus. So we'll start with supply positions, and I think what I'll do is I'll ask Will to start with Australia, and then we can move from Australia to the US, and I'll give you a Canadian perspective. And we're going to rely on Mehmood to provide for us a bit of perspective, not only on Sri Lanka, because I think that really what we're looking for is a perspective of an end-use user of lentils coming from the different origins. I think it's important to look at some of the issues facing our industry going forward. So Will, I'll turn to you.
Thanks, Murad. I'll just run through briefly what I think the production in Australia's been and going to be this year and possibly next year. In recent times with Australian lentils, we've seen very high prices due to a global shortage. So in 3 years ago, we started seeing lentil prices up over $1,000 to the grower. So obviously the growers have then started turning around and planting more lentils, and we've seen that globally in Australia and Canada. So our crop in the last couple of years has increased compared to years before that. So in 2010 and 11, we had a crop size of about 300,000 tonnes. And in a normal year, that year we had 250,000 tonnes of exports. So there was a carry-out of somewhere between 50 to 75,000 tonnes of 2010, 2011 crop. So going into 2011, 2012 crop, which was a similar size, slightly smaller, something like 275,000 tonnes, we planted, according to Pulse Australia, about 175,000 hectares. So this year there's still plenty of stocks in Australia, and if exports continue on the same pace they have done for last year and so far this year, we'd expect a slightly smaller carry-out at the end of this season going into 2012's crop of somewhere between 25 and 50,000 tonnes. So right now there's plenty of lentils still kicking around in Australia that we have to export in the next few months. As far as those exports go out of Australia, last year, again, like I said, there was 250,000 tonnes exported. The main buyer of that was Sri Lanka, which actually took 90,000 tonnes, and then Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the United Arab Emirates, about 30,000 tonnes each, were the main buyers of our red lentils out of Australia. One thing to note there is the fact that India isn't really a big buyer of our red lentils, and maybe this year that's something we need to consider with what's happening over there. So that's Australia, Murad.
Well, just before we move out of Australia, just give a perspective of, the current stock levels. You talked about, ample stocks being available. Carryover from last year, there was some quality issues in Australia versus the new crop. What is your view on current stocks? Is there the old crop stock still laying around, or has it been burned through?
Oh, there's always going to be some old crop stocks kicking around, but a lot of it now will be new crop, and the quality is much better. So it's a big improvement on the year before. So again, Australia's weather, it's very volatile, so who knows? I mean, new crop, again, there could be rain, there could be anything, there could be hot weather. There's all sorts of things that can impact the Australian crop and cause some damage.
Okay, and give us a perspective on 2012 plantings and view of where production is going.
Well, because of the way the price has been to the farmer in Australia recently, the new crop plantings will be down. Not drastically, probably maybe 10%, something like that. Again, it's early to say. If there's a rally in the lentil market now, again, they will plant more. So, but currently, we'd say the crop will be maybe 10% down on last year, which would put it somewhere between 250 to 275,000 tons next year. Again, which is adequate to cover all the exports that we've had so far.
Good, thank you, Jeff. We'll switch gears and take a look at the northern tier states, lentils in the U.S. We'll ask you to give us a similar type of overview.
Sure. In the United States, we grow primarily green lentils. About 70% of our crop is typically richly green lentils. So we started this year, last year, 2010 crop, we raised a little over 400,000 tons. We started this year with relatively large carryout stocks as we had quality problems in our 2010 crop, so there was a lot of that product that didn't move. We started out with 120,000 tons, which typically in the U.S. we've been basically at 15 to 20,000 ton ending stocks, which is virtually sold out. So we started out strong. We had miserable seeding conditions through the spring. Only had a crop this year of about 225,000 tons. So with our inventory that was up, we came in here in about December 1st with about 300, just shy of 300,000 tons, which is virtually unchanged from the prior year. In the U.S. this year, we've struggled somewhat to get on exports. As of the end of the first quarter, we'd only done about 28,000 metric tons in exports versus 60,000 tons the previous year. And some of that has to do with the Colombian Free Trade Agreement, which a lot of our richlies do end up going into Colombia, and the U.S. is at about an 18% disadvantage to Canada right now because the U.S. hasn't managed to get a free trade agreement passed with Colombia yet. And we've also, a lot of our richlies need to come to India, and the market just has not been there for our richlies to disappear into India. So we've struggled. We have strong stocks at this point in time.
Acreage, what do you think is happening in the interaction with other crops, Jeff?
Well, last year we lost a lot of acreage, and the primary reason for losing it last year was the weather. We just could never get it seeded. If you looked at it today based upon prices, I've taken a look at it at $675 a ton India. That's the number 11 crop that a farmer in North Dakota can seed. Malt barley's better, corn's better, soybeans better, flax is better, canola's better, and in North Dakota even wheat is better, which is, wheat economics aren't that great this year, but in North Dakota it's better. When you move into Montana where we're a little bit drier, we don't have the choices for soybeans in that, lentils can still stand in about the 4th or 5th best crop. Based upon the acres that we lost last year in North Dakota just due to weather, the U.S. should rebound acres, probably somewhat back up to about the 500, 550,000 acre level again this year. Montana, I would imagine, will probably be about sideways. In the United States, we're really just, some of our producers are starting to fall in love with it more as a rotation, and particularly in Montana. So I believe we'll be somewhere around the 550 to 600,000 level for acres and lentils this year.
Perfect. I guess I'll move on to Canada, give you a bit of a perspective. If we look at the current production levels in Canada, 2011 crop was around 2.6 million acres, and harvested stocks were reported around 1.55 million tons. If we look at exports reported to end of December, about 500,000 tons has been exported. So we're left with total stock of around probably somewhere around 1 million tons, including red and green. The breakdown in terms of current crop stocks would be, in my estimation, probably around 500,000 ton of red and about an equal amount of green lentils. Remember, in Canada, with the green lentils, we do have Eston type small green, very limited medium green production, and very significant large green production. So when we look at a green lentil, carry of 500,000 tons, it is in multiple different crops. I think one of the things that a lot of importers are asking in India is, what has happened to the carryover of 2010 stock? As you all know, when we have a crop issue in the world in terms of production, usually we're dealing with frost or drought in Canada. And so the 2010 crop would have presented for us probably one of the most substantially disastrous outcomes, where acreage had reached a record of 3.5 million acres of production. And at a time where yields looked very strong, we had 21 days of rain, and we received an annual rainfall in 21 days at harvest. So we received moisture equivalent to the total annual average rainfall. What that did was degrade the quality quite substantially, and many of the importers in the world have faced issues around that crop. The good news is that stock is, relatively speaking, it's exhausted. And so, if we look at deliveries into plants now, we wouldn't have significant exportable stocks remaining of 2010 crops. So I think that's a positive thing. When we look at overall acreage in Canada, we definitely have a shifting economic trend and a very dynamic agricultural economy in Western Canada in the coming year. The deregulation of the Canadian Wheat Board will lead to the first time in the history of Western Canadian farmers in the last approximately 60 years, where they are free to market cereal grains to anyone they choose. And so because of that, there's a lot of buzz and a lot of interest in cereal production. And of course, the prices have been very strong. And agronomically and in terms of ease of growing conditions, wheat for farmers in Western Canada is a sure bet. So from that perspective, pulses need to be, they're a rotational crop. They're not going away. They're firmly entrenched in the rotation in Canada. I think, Jeff, you'll agree. In the U.S., we're growing that trend in terms of it becoming the rotational crop. In Canada, it is not an option. It will be a cereal, an oilseed, a legume, or a 4-year rotation where the legume will either be once or twice in the rotation. So, we have the acreage. The question is, what will they plant in the legume rotation? Lentil returns have lagged all other pulses. If we look, peas has been a very strong performer. Chickpeas with limited production has been a very strong performer. And lentils, as a result of very strong pricing over the past 3 seasons, we are back at levels that 5 years ago were considered a good level, but today they're considered a disastrous level for the farmers. So as a result of that, we're forecasting a further 20% decline in acreage coming this year. In addition, people are starting to talk about the winter season. And if we look at the winter season, for those of you who have been in Saskatchewan, on the 25th of December, we had not a snowflake on the ground. So we had dirt around our yards. The temperature was plus 6 degrees on Christmas Day. And we said if this continues, the population of Saskatchewan will be like India, maybe in the coming years, because it's a beautiful place, but usually people say it's too cold. Now it's not too cold any longer. So we're having a very unusual climate effect on the winter season. And if we look at it, snowfall is significantly behind average. And so there are definitely views of when we look at the dry fall, which led to a very good quality result for our harvest, the coming season, the snowfall is really a fraction of usual. And so there are starting to become concerns about topsoil moisture. And so we'll have to see how that all plays out as well. When you compound all of these effects, you have a stock level in Canada, but you certainly have acreage on the decline, and you have moisture concerns that are currently in the market. Now, Mahmoud, if I turn around from a perspective of the importer, I'd just like to have you give us a bit of a perspective on some of the factors that are playing into overall your business as an importer, processor, and re-exporter even what are some of the concerns affecting the lentil market for you as a processor?
Yeah, thank you, Murad. First thing is, as you know, in 2009-10 we had quality issues, and as a splitter, in fact, we had, I'm sorry, we had more quality issues in 2009 because of the number 3s and extra 3 grades. But especially 2010-2011 crop, sorry, 2011-2012 crops has been very good, and we've been getting good quality from Australia, nuggets especially, and secondly again from Canada, the crimson number 2s, and so there has no quality issues, especially this year. But our concern, especially in Sri Lanka, is that the government keeps on changing policies, right? When the prices of commodity, especially like lentils, are down, the duty structure goes up, and vice versa. When the prices go up, the duty structure comes down. And another factor is, as you are also a big player in this split in Sri Lanka, market in Sri Lanka, it all depends on the vegetable prices. The lentil sales all depend on the vegetable prices. If the prices of vegetable are lower, the sale of lentils are reduced. And it's the other way around again. If the prices of vegetable go up, the sales are increased.
I think, it's certainly very apparent there are a lot of factors, that are affecting import, viability and import policy of government. It's certainly something that we're all watching very, very closely. On the panel, we have our speaker from India was unable to join us. So I think what I may do is I may ask, if anyone has any perspectives from the panel on their views on what they're hearing about India, what effect that may have on the market overall. We're not going to get into prices and things yet. We've got a few minutes on that, but let me start off the discussion to provoke a bit of discussion. If we look at the overall dynamics of the market today, we are certainly, I think, as a trade, acknowledging that there is certainly some reduction in acreage here, which is following the pattern of what we saw in Canada, U.S., Australia, and Turkey. And this change in acreage in the plantings is really a follow of cereals and oilseed prices. So with a reduction in acreage, reduction in the potential on pigeon peas, we certainly have a dynamic whereby, the stock levels in the current crop coming seem to have, the potential of having some pressure. But I think we all acknowledge that in India, no one knows until we come closer to the time of harvest and receival. So, Will, maybe I'll ask you just if you have any perspective of what you're hearing, what your thoughts are, and how that'll affect the Australian market.
Sure, Murad. All I've heard is that, the acreage is down, and crop could be, I've heard all sorts of numbers, 10, 20, 50% down on normal. And it all depends if India turn to Australia and start to buy product from Australia, which we haven't really seen for quite a long time. So if that happens, it'll definitely have an impact, because our old crop might all disappear very quickly, and there'll be some pressure on, when new crop arrives. So it make it, as always, India would make a huge difference if they did start buying in volume out of Australia.
Okay.
Just haven't seen anything yet. It's all just weather talk as usual. So.
Okay, Jeff?
Well, not that 2 days makes you an expert, but I did go out and spend 2 days driving in Madhya Pradesh here this past week. And basically, the general thought pattern was the crop is about 20 to 25% lower in that area this year. But I would say that the crop looked very, very good from everything that I could see. I expected to see plants here, plants there, but it looked like a U.S. or a Canadian crop as you drove through it. One thing that we heard in the Gala Mondays was that there was a lot of stock. There was a lot of people still with 2- and 3-year-old stock. So it feels like the market has plenty of product at this point in time, but definitely the crop is lower and behind in its maturity.
Right. Mahmood?
Yeah, and lately we've been hearing almost 50% crop short in India because of the less seedings and less moisture. So probably what we are hearing is and we should know by the end of this month because how is the harvesting time. So we feel there is definitely a shortage in India. You know.
Okay, good. I want to move on to currency effects. You know, currency effects are really a big issue. I think that if we look at the overall impact on the lentil sector, you know, we were doing some calculation today, and I want to throw out a couple of these. Were very rough calculations, and we were talking about 2001. In 2001, CFR levels into Indian subcontinent for whole red lentils from Canada, for instance, were $325 CFR Indian main ports. So, you know, 325. Is Sudhakar here? Where's Sudhakar? Is he here? And Sudhakar, are you a buyer at 325 today? Yeah. So 325 sounds like a level that is a phenomenal level, you know, but if we look at it on a currency adjusted basis, 325 US, at the time the Canadian dollar was 62 cents US. If you do a currency adjusted basis today, 325 is equivalent to 535 US. So this effect between 325 and 535 is merely the move of the Canadian dollar. So when we look at it, currencies have a real effect on the baseline price in the market. You know, that's a perspective. Mehmet, I'm going to start back with you. As an importer, obviously currency is something that really has an effect on business.
Yeah, it's really affected, but lately I think probably you would have known since 5 days, our currency has been devalued by 8%, which really gives us a big impact on the price, on our imports. So it's a big impact, in fact, now, big impact.
Will?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with the Australian dollar. Recent times it started to move, not 50, you know, it's moved cents, it's moved 3-4 cents in a day. So it makes a huge difference. And currently we're looking at prices to the grower. The farmer's not really that pleased. We're at the bottom as far as prices in Australia go, but still on a CFR level, on a US dollar basis, the prices aren't that cheap. I mean, they're still, you know, fairly decent. So to the farmer back home, yeah, it has a big impact, the fact that, you know, as our dollar gets higher and higher and higher, his returns will either get less and less and he just won't sell it, or our US dollar price will continue upwards.
And I think that the Australian currency is certainly one that has an effect of even much more dramatic than the Canadian. So when we look at, you know, the Australian dollar in 2009, I guess, was around, if I remember correctly, around 58 cents, 55. Now we're sitting at $1.08. So that is, you know, really a absolutely crazy revaluation of the currency. Jeff, you're in the land of stable currency because everyone talks about U.S., but any perspectives on currency effects?
Well, from our standpoint, utilizing the US dollar, the biggest effect we see on it is our buyers' ability to pay as their currencies are devalued, and the demand structure that it brings to us. We typically lose demand as our dollar gets stronger, obviously.
So we have the two sides of the coin. I mean, it affects importers, it affects exporters, you know, on both sides for sure. One of the other things we'd written down here before we get into the real question and answer is quality standards of the crop. Now, we had panelists here who had a perspective on it. In the view of time, I think what we may say is we'll invite comments or questions as a part of this. There was a view of panelists that quality standards in Canada, US, Australia, Turkey, India are not synchronized. We don't have quantitative standards that are matching and definitions that are matching, and as a result it's causing some problems in the trade. Invite any perspectives. Jeff, why don't you give